Last week, Biden fulfilled a major campaign promise, making the historic move to, quote, support global waiver on intellectual property protections for COVID vaccines.
Here to discuss what that means and why it's important is author and research director at American Economic Liberties Project, Matt Stoller, great friend of the show. Great to see you, Matt.
Good to see you, Matt.
Good to see you.
All right, so break down what Biden actually did and why you see it as very significant.
Yeah, so there's a couple of really good vaccines that U.S. largely developed with U.S. technology as well as German technology. These are mRNA vaccines. It's the ones from Pfizer and from Moderna. And these companies have a lot of intellectual property that they use as barriers to prevent anyone else from creating it. And we just don't have enough vaccines to vaccinate the world. And if you don't vaccinate the world, then what's going to happen is you're going to get variants that will emerge that will be able to get around vaccines. So the COVID pandemic will come back. So one of the debates was, well, how do you get this technology out into the rest of the world so that they can make enough vaccines? Because there are sort of some spare factories that you could use. And it was a big fight because Pharma doesn't actually want to share their technology, right? Because if there are variants, it's actually good for their business because then they get to sell booster shots for years and years and years to rich countries at a higher price. So what Biden did is he said, look, we want to negotiate a waiver of the intellectual property that these firms have and get this technology out to the rest of the world so that they can produce the mRNA vaccines. They'll still have to pay Pfizer, Moderna, BioNTech, but those companies won't be able to stop others from producing this technology and these vaccines. So it was a big fight, and now the U.S. flipped its position. It's got to be a global decision, so there's a bunch of countries that are opposing it, mostly in Europe. But now we're kind of in this stage where the world has to discuss how to get this vaccine technology out. And it's a huge loss for Pharma, and Pharma never loses. So that's a big deal.
Yeah. And so, Matt, put this in the context of how you've seen the Biden administration on these issues. We were talking before the segment about Lina Khan. She's a big antitrust advocate. She was voted for with a huge majority in the United States Senate. What do you see? Maybe put this in the context of Biden, her appointment, and just the general scope of antitrust right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing. I'm surprised at how aggressive the Biden administration is, and also how the Republicans are turning against monopolies as well. So the going after Pfizer and Moderna and saying you have to share your technology, you'll still get paid for it again, but you have to share it, is a huge move to stop a monopolists from gouging the world when we need their products. It's kind of like treating their patents and their IP as a common carrier. In parallel with that, Joe Biden nominated Lina Khan, who is probably the most influential anti-monopoly scholar in the country, maybe the world, to be an antitrust enforcer at the FTC. She's 32 years old, so she's young, she's progressive, and she got, as you noted, overwhelming support from Democrats and Republicans in committee yesterday. It was a vote you probably didn't hear of because everyone was obsessed with Liz Cheney. But this is the way that our economy and our systems of production are going to be restructured. So it's this remarkable turn by both the Biden and the Republicans against concentrated power. It's really surprising. It's pretty awesome. And, there's a lot of hurdles, of course, and it may fall apart, but it's just remarkable.
Here at Rising, we support being obsessed both with Liz Cheney and Lina Khan. That's our official stance on the issue. Talk to me a little bit. What's that? Excited for our podcast. Yeah, in our official, MSNBC contributor role right there next to Nicole Wallace. That's going to be amazing. Can't wait to not watch that.
The soul of the Republicans.
So, Matt, talk to me a little bit more about the patent protection being lifted. As you pointed out, there's still some barriers to this actually mattering from a practical perspective. Number one, you got to get the rest of the world on board, in particular Europe. Germany already came out and was like, no, we're not going along with this. So number one, is the Biden administration going to put pressure on these countries to actually get on board? Number two, why didn't they there was a little bit of kind of like weaselly language of we support lifting the patent protection, we're going to negotiate, rather than signing on to the existing TRIPS waiver that's currently, been proposed at the World Trade Organization. What do you make of those pieces? And also, as a practical matter too, they really went out of their way to say, we're just talking about the coronavirus vaccine. This absolutely doesn't apply to anything else. We fully support patent protection in every other realm, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so those are great questions. So what the Biden administration, there's basically two things they have to do to make this real. And one is they have to get the rest of the world on board, which I think, it's difficult to do that, but it's not impossible. And what is kind of nice here is that the Biden administration actually made the Europeans have been hiding behind Trump for a long time, kind of like the Democrats. They're like, we're going to disguise our flaws by saying, he's terrible. And that's what the Europeans have done. They're like, oh, we're really nice. We're lovely. We're good to the rest of the world. But Trump is the bad guy. And now Biden flipped it. And they like to hide behind the big bad Americans. So Biden flipped it. And Biden said, we're going to share technology and we'd like your help. And the Europeans, especially Angela Merkel, who loves to parade around as the leader of the free world, is like, no, we want to protect our IP. So there's a lot of pressure internally from these countries saying if America is flipped, we should flip. So it's quite possible that they could negotiate something effectively with the rest of the world. It also reestablishes American leadership in a real way, not in this kind of like nonsense, oh, we can blow people up in other countries kind of way. But they do have to get the rest of the world on board, and that is a challenge. The other challenge is it's not just patents. It's IP in general. So the patents are for the vaccine. There's lots of different patents on the vaccines, but there's copyrights on the machines, on the software on the machines that do all the mixing. There are patents up and down and monopolization up and down the supply chain for all of the equipment. So the question is kind of what is the extent of the what's called the TRIPS waiver, which is the discussion to relax these monopoly controls. So that's an open question. And then Biden has to force the tech transfer, because even if you allow all this IP out there, you still have to get these companies to share information about how to actually set up the plants and how to move this information, which they can do pretty quickly, but that you have to do in addition to the TRIPS waiver. Again, these companies will get paid. They will get paid a lot of money, but you're forcing a tech transfer. It's narrow, as you noted, but it's still a big deal. It should be broader. It would be good if they signed on to the South Africa and India one, but that's not totally necessary. What we really need to do is get the technology out there.
Mm-hmm. All right. Really important information. Matt, always great having you here to break things down.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm. Coming up on Rising, political reporter at the Huffington Post, Daniel Marins, can discuss the New York City mayoral race. Rising continues.